I remember going to Glenties, and there was the trip up the stairs into a bedroom, and the fiddle was produced, and they discussed stuff. And I sat on the bed and I was handed the fiddle and I played a tune, and they went, "Oh yeah, James." Oh. And I knew James Byrne was like someone, but that was my first time meeting him. But you know, again later on in life, and probably again talking to James more than anyone else, I know they had a big fondness for each other, and that maintained to the very end. Like when Dad lived in Donegal, James, he spent a lot of time with James, playing with him, and with Danny Meehan, and the three of them together. And there's some great photographs in the latter years of the three of them. I'm sure the escapades back in the day were epic. And I know there's one about the three of them heading off to find John Doherty and all this. You know, I'm sure half that's urban legend by now, but it's such a great story, you know, and tears fell and all this kind of, you know, the way they put baubles on stories, like. But no, he adored James. And again, I think it was that gentleness that James had that Dad could identify with. Plus, James, when James took off, you'd be hard pushed to find anyone to play an air like him, or position work, or, you know, all the stuff that Dad would have loved. And I don't actually know what age he was when he met James first, but I wouldn't imagine he was too young, because they were opposite ends of the county. But we left Donegal once, and I know Lachlan was a baby, so that's 32 years ago. We went on a kind of a trip. We stayed in Roscommon up in Strokestown, and there was a night there with Tommy Guihan, who was only a young fella then, and a few more flute players. And then we went up to Granny's house in Kinnecally. Spent a couple of nights there, and as we were coming home, my mother was in the back with the baby, so I was in the front, and Mam nodded off, and we got as far as Donegal town, and he goes, "Sure, we'll head over to Ardra." Right, and I said, "Grand." You know, I didn't understand now we could be adding half a day to the trip, you know. So my mother fell asleep, probably in Ballybuffet here, and but he drove around, and I remember him telling stories about tunes there, and there was tunes here, and I remember him telling us a story about a house that they passed and some strange thing happened. And we passed that house, and so he would have had a lot of stories about incidents. He was always, he would get brown bread and black pudding and put them in his pocket and head off. And I'm saying, "Black pudding, like what?" And he goes, "Sure, yeah, it's cooked, like. You know, this, all I need is a bit of bread and a bit of pudding, like." Or he'd get an onion and a plate full of salt and eat it like an apple. And you'd be there like, but that, he reckoned all you needed was potatoes and onions. And then if you were going travelling, your black bread and your brown bread and your black pudding. But you know, his graph for Donegal was huge. But he, the first time I heard him mention a lot of those people was on that trip. And of course, then my poor mother woke up in Ardra and says, "Where are we?" Like, it's about 2.5 hours later. And Dad said, "Oh, we're in Ardra," and we were in long turn around and heading for Knock, let me tell you. So I never did the whole Donegal thing with him. When I did, it was to go home. He'd go home and he'd paint the house and he'd do the jobs that needed doing, you know. I remember he painted the gable one day, and he went into Raffo, because you get the paint mixed to get more paint, and by the time he came back it had rained and the whole thing had been washed off, and he just turned around, went off, bought more paint and started again, like. Danny Meehan, so he spoke to me about Danny Meehan quite a bit, actually. Danny was his hero. He spoke about him. He said, he said, Siobhan, you want to see him? He said, he's a big, tall, handsome man. He said he could be in Hollywood, and he has this, what's the word? This kind of an aura, and he just attracts people, and he's a showman, and he was everything I think Dad would have loved to have been, but wasn't. But he had a love for Denny Meehan that was huge. And I remember my first time meeting Denny, he walked into Cruises during one of the very early festivals, and he was standing in front of us, and someone said, "Oh, that's Denny Meehan," and I remember just going, and I went up to him, and I said, "You Denny Meehan?" And he says, "Yeah," and I said, "I'm Siobhan," and he goes, "Siobhan Peoples," and I said, "Yeah," and he goes, "I have to go," he says, "because I'm going to start crying." And he said, "That last time I saw you," he said, "I was bouncing you on my knee." Do you know, but I think there was a massive respect and love between the two of them. And James, and I'm not leaving James out of this, but it's just I remember him talking about Denny, you know. And again, like James, his command of the instrument, Dad was just blown away by that.